Janet Jackson. Sex, scandals, and star power. She is a visionary, influential in her genre, defying music and her performance style. Her innovative sound, groundbreaking videos, and her socially conscious lyrics has established Janet as a global icon in the entertainment industry. She has broken gender and racial barriers endlessly through her decades-long profession, becoming one of the world's most illustrious artists. But her career hasn't been without turbulence and heartbreak. Once cast in the shadow of her famous family, Janet has managed to prove herself as someone worth paying attention to, becoming a powerhouse figure in her own right. Her journey is a testament to resilience, creativity, and sheer talent. Janet Jackson was born on May 16, 1966, in Gary, Indiana, the youngest of 10 children in a working-class African-American family who shared a 2-bedroom house on Jackson Street.
The Jackson family were in Gary, Indiana, so they were quite a poor family. They lived all together, were like 6 kids, living together in a tiny house.
Her mother, Catherine Esther Jackson, played clarinet and piano, aspiring to be a country and western performer. She lovingly referred to Janet as "my baby," attending all her concerts. Her father, Joseph Walter Jackson, also known as Joe Jackson, a former boxer turned crane operator, had a passion for guitar and played in a local rhythm and blues band, the Falcons, with his brother, trying to supplement the family's income. Despite their efforts, the Falcons disbanded without a record deal. Janet grew up with 2 sisters, Rebe and LaToya, and 6 brothers, including Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, Randy, and Michael. While Janet and her sisters lived at home, her brothers and father enjoyed a more lavish lifestyle in Los Angeles. Janet witnessed her brothers rise as the Jackson 5, signing with Motown in March 1969 and achieving their first #1 hit when Janet was just 3 years old.
Being on stage with my brothers was a wonderful experience, like a revelation. And it was almost as if it was deja vu, as if it happened yesterday. And I love my brothers. All the hysteria and adulation and all the notoriety that comes with being a performer, it's always a great pleasure.
Her life transformed very quickly. By the time she was like 3 or 4 years old, her brothers were already superstars. So she had a very unusual childhood in that respect, because she could like switch on TV on Saturday morning and watch her brothers as cartoons, or she could see them perform on TV. They had hit records back to back. So she, in a way, she had quite a privileged growing up. She was in a sort of superstar world, you know, friends of the family like Diana Ross and the Motown stars. And Janet was the young, quiet, shy one who I think expectations weren't very high of her, really, because it was all the focus at that time was on her brothers and their huge success. The Jackson 5 were the first black male boy band, teen band. I mean, they were idols. You can't really underestimate the success, the cultural success of the Jackson 5, especially in terms of their meaning in Black America, because they were, well, the success was phenomenal for a start. They had like 5 back-to-back #1 records. They were everywhere. They were on Sunday morning TV, they returned to cartoons, they were on cereal boxes. There was a particular energy and vivacity to those songs. You know, there was an energy to those Jackson 5 records you couldn't deny, and so they just popped out of the radio. Everyone fell in love with them, especially Michael, because Michael had this spirit. Michael fronted the band and had this energy and this charisma and this voice, and even from a very, very young age. Some people thought he might be a midget, you know, like an old man, because his James Brown moves were so unusual for a kid so young. And I think it just grabbed the nation's attention, really.
Janet faced as much pressure as any of the other Jacksons to push herself to the limit. Being the youngest of the family, she knew that being compared to her brothers was inevitable, and that she would eventually be expected to follow in their footsteps. There was no preferred method on Joe's part to the baby of the group, but he did dominate over her career with utmost precision and discipline. Inspired by her family's musical success, Janet initially aspired to be a horse racing jockey or entertainment lawyer, planning to support herself through acting. However, her father recognized her singing talent early on and took control of her career path.
Like all the Jackson kids, Janet really was controlled by her father from a young age and forced into really becoming, you know, an actress and then a musical star. She spoke herself many years later that wasn't really necessarily what she wanted to do. It just was kind of felt inevitable. It was just like where the kids were expected to. It's what she'd seen all her life since being a young girl. Like, that's what her brothers did. That's what her sisters did.
Janet's relationship with her father was described as complex, with him having a strict approach to raising his children for show business. He emphasized perfection and instilled a deep love for music, striving to keep his family away from negative influences like drugs and street life. As well as raising his children with good intentions, he is said to have been emotionally withdrawn and told Janet to address him solely by his first name as a child. Despite her early exposure to fame through her family, Janet struggled to establish her own identity as an artist under her father's management.
Both Michael and LaToya in their biographies talked about how strict Joseph was, you know, whether it was like physical abuse or what was more emotional abuse. They were scared of him. And I think that was the same for Janet. She possibly didn't suffer as much as the older kids, but she still was under the strict control of her dad and had to follow the family line and do what she was told, basically.
In 1976, Janet's career gained momentum with the debut of the Jacksons, a variety show.
The Jacksons' variety show came about in the mid-70s, kind of at a time when there was a bit of a lull in the brothers' success. The hit records had dried up a bit, so their father, Joe, who was the manager, had this idea of creating pitching them to do a all-American variety TV show with special guests. Kind of that sort of thing that the Osmonds were doing at the time. And that was the point really where Janet was first introduced into the spotlight. They'd done like gigs in Vegas and stuff where she first came out, would do like a Mae West impersonation or something like that. But then the whole nation got to know her because of the Jacksons' TV specials. It didn't run for very long. I think it was like 12 episodes or something. But Janet was a key part of it. And what she would do is come on and be cute, do little skits. Her and her brother, Randy, the youngest brother, would do like Sonny and Cher impersonations. And really people thought of her as like the cute younger sister. You know, this like chubby-faced little girl. You didn't really get a sense from her in the Jacksons variety show of what she would become, necessarily.
She performed with her brother Randy at the MGM Casino when she was only 7 years old, marking her early entry into entertainment.
And the beat goes on, the beat goes on, and the beat goes on, and the beat goes on, the beat goes on. Yesterday beat goes on.
Throughout her teenage years, she continued to appear on television, including shows like Good Times, Different Strokes, and the dance series Fame.
Well, I finally had it out with my father. No matter what I do, it's wrong.
Oh, I'm sure he doesn't really think that.
But he does. And I think by now I've earned the right to be trusted. I'm a full-grown woman.
Yeah, the fullest.
Well, what did your father say to you?
Well, all through dinner, he kept picking on me just because I forgot to run an errand I promised to do. And my mother, she just sat there not saying a word.
There were big shows. I mean, the first one she got cast in was Good Times, which was like a massive, long-running Black American sitcom where she played a character called Penny. She was like an abused kid who was taken in by the family in the sitcom. Black America fell in love with Janet Jackson at that point because she played this series of roles, starting in Good Times and going through Different Strokes, where she was very much the girl next door, a young, very attractive, cute, relatable kid who had a certain naivety and charm about her. She had the ability to perform these roles and, for people to fall in love with her.
At 16, Janet embarked on her solo recording career at A&M Records, releasing her debut album, Janet Jackson, in 1982. Assisted by her father during production, she collaborated with numerous songwriters and producers. The album was a significant success, reaching number 63 on the charts within 4 months and selling over 82,000 copies in the United States through BMG Music Club. This album is described as a dance and contemporary R&B record, with songwriters such as Angela Winbush and Renee Moore contributing to much of the album's lyrics. Her second album, Dream Street, released in 1984, sold 21,000 copies between 1991 and November 2006. This album also marked her debut music video, filmed during her stint on the TV show Fame. Janet appeared on this show for one season as Cleo. It was based on the film of the same name in 1980, and much like the movie, followed the storyline where the students, in addition to normal boxes, get into music, dance, and theater. The series showed a number of dramatic scenes interspersed with music and dance numbers. It was during this period that Janet began to assert control over her career, forging her own path and developing a distinctive and influential style.
They were good. They were fine, kind of like fizzy teen pop records. A lot of fun. They weren't necessarily big hits. Although, she had a couple of minor R&B hits off the records, but she didn't break through. She wasn't like, she didn't immediately become a massive star.
She returned in 1986 with her breakthrough album, Control, which emphasized personal empowerment and a new artistic direction. Her bold independence resonated strongly with audiences, propelling Janet to stardom comparable to that of her brother, Michael Jackson. This album really launched Jackson into the popular music market, becoming one of the foremost albums of the 1980s and contemporary music. Containing autobiographical themes, most of what the album has to offer came as a result of changes in her personal life, such as severing her business affairs from her father and manager, Joseph, as well as the rest of the Jackson family, hiring the A&M executive John McClain as her new management, and her introduction to Jam and Lewis.
Control was Janet's breakthrough moment. Janet had done a couple of albums that hadn't been received incredibly well, and the record company wanted to move things on. And her A&R guy at the time, John McClane, suggested she work with up-and-coming producers Jam and Lewis. And together they forged this incredibly groundbreaking sound, which sort of fused hip-hop beats, harder industrial sounds with Minneapolis funk. And it was immediately a sensation because you hadn't really heard anything like that, especially from a young teen star of that age. And you can't really talk about Janet's success without talking about Jam and Lewis. Originally, Jam and Lewis were in The Time, so in the funk band The Time, and they started producing their own records and started having hits with acts like the SOS Band and Alexander O'Neill. And they wanted to work with a new act, and Janet Jackson made sense because she was a sort of had all this potential, but that hadn't quite yet been tapped into. What happened with Janet's Control album was that for the first time, she was actually part of the creative process. She hung out with Jam and Lewis and told them stories about her childhood, about where her life was at the time, and they incorporated that into the tracks. So all the songs on Control have this sort of semi-autobiographical feel, and she really invested herself in them, and she probably invested herself in that record for the first time more than ever. And I think that kind of energy and that honesty was what really connected with audiences. You know, to see a young black teen female speaking honestly about her life and the pressure she was under and taking control was something new and fresh. The success of Control was so groundbreaking. She had like 6 top 20 hits off that album. So it was massive.
As time went by, Janet's partnership with production duo Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis delivered some of the most effervescent tracks of her career. Songs such as Nasty and What Have You Done For Me Lately would ultimately define the pop scene of the 1980s.
No, my first name ain't baby, it's Janet. Miss Jackson if you're nasty. Nasty boys, I don't mean a thing. Oh, you nasty boys. Nasty boys, I don't ever change. Oh, you nasty boys. Nasty boys, don't mean a thing. Oh, you nasty boys, don't mean.
Though it wasn't all fierce sexuality and stardom for this pop diva, as her marriage to American singer James DeBarge in 1984 would be fraught with challenges. Their shared passion for music would spark a whirlwind romance. And on the 7th of September in 1984, just 2 years later, the sweethearts wed in a secret ceremony. Though the relationship would ultimately crumble as DeBarge's struggle with addiction would culminate in the young lovers getting an annulment in 1985.
Like all the Jackson kids, really, they wanted to escape the strict control of their father. And I think Janet was no different. So in a way, although she was very privileged in her childhood, she also suffered because of the sort of strictness of the environment and the way in which Joe was such a domineering character, her father. And when she first met James DeBarge, I think she was 16 years old, and they met on the set of Soul Train, which is so appropriate. I mean, DeBarge were another musical family, so they had a lot in common. And they started a secret romance, and then they eloped a couple of years later. They ran off to Michigan and got married in a secret ceremony. And it was kind of Janet's first moment of rebellion to break away from that strict control of her father and try to become her own person. But it didn't really work out. I mean, there's a story on their wedding night where he just disappeared for hours and no one knew where he was. And he was obviously out scoring drugs. And that became a bigger issue as marriage went along. And so really, it was a moment of teenage rebellion on Janet's part. They were both incredibly young. She was 16, I think he was 18. And it didn't really last very long, but I think it was an important stage in Janet's development, really, to prove to herself that she could do something, to be her own person, even if it ended badly.
The album had been praised by critics as both an artistic feat and a personal testament of self-realization. Control became Jackson's first album to top the Billboard 200 albums chart in the United States, and 5 of its singles peaked within the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100 chart, making Jackson the first female artist to have 5 top hits from one album on the Billboard Hot 100. Music videos created to showcase her dancing abilities became a catalyst for MTV's evolving demographics. Returning in 1989 with one of her most diverse works, the iconic Rhythm Nation, she would earn 7 top 10 pop singles for songs such as Miss You Much, Escapade, and Love Will Never Do Without You. The album's visual direction is also deemed as a huge achievement for Janet. Slick music videos showed Janet and her army of dancers performing rapid choreography. The album touched on political themes such as racial inequality and poverty. She also drew inspiration from various other tragedies like substance abuse, in addition to themes of romance. Rhythm Nation became Jackson's second album to top the Billboard 200. It became the best-selling album of 1990 in the U.S. and has sold around 12 million copies worldwide. Critics have come to regard it as the pinnacle of artistic achievement. It has also been cited as a piece of influence in the works of numerous music artists, setting trends in the years since its release.
Janet had already broken records with like having 6 hits off the first album, off Control, but with Rhythm Nation, there was even more, like 7. She had 7 top 5 hits in America, which is unbelievable, really, which was record-breaking at the time. And also, genre-wise, she'd rock with Black Cat. She had like her big statement record with Rhythm Nation itself. She had like Miss You Much, which was the first single, which was like a gateway, which kind of like eased people in, I think, to the themes of the album a bit. You know, with the videos, she had this sort of military look, very buttoned up with the sort of military jacket and the black cap. But by the end, she did a video with Herb Ritts, Love Will Never Do Without You, where for the first time, she was like showing off her body. Her navel was on display. It was a beautiful black and white video shot by Herb Ritts on the beach. And that was the first time that Janet became sexy, really. She wasn't really thought of as like a sex symbol before that. She was cute, fun, Michael's little sister growing up, but by the end of the Rhythm Nation cycle with Love Will Never Do, she was now a bona fide sex symbol.
The 90s would also bring a new style of performance for Janet, known for being erotically charged and highly sensual. This image of Janet as a sex symbol was celebrated by some, but garnered criticism from others.
What Janet and Jammin Lewis did that was really clever, I think, on the second album is that everybody was expecting Control Part 2, and they didn't want to make Control Part 2. They wanted to do something completely different. So they shifted the focus from Janet's personal growth as a young woman, taking control of her life, to a much more outward-looking, sort of state-of-the-world kind of perspective, where she was taking on big themes like social injustice and poverty and crime. And it was kind of Janet's What's Going On, really. The tracks, not all the tracks, but the key tracks, things like Rhythm Nation itself and State of the World and Living in a World We Didn't Make, she's kind of addressing these big themes in a relatable kind of pop way. By the end of the 80s, Janet was, without doubt, a megastar. And so her record contract with A&M was about to expire. And so she signed to Virgin Records for an unprecedented amount at the time. I think it was the biggest record deal of all time at that point, for $80 million, to do her next record, which was ended up being titled Janet, with a lowercase j.
As the world entered the 1990s, Janet continued to evolve her sound and look to keep up with the times. In 1991, she became one of the highest-paid artists in the industry after signing the first of 2 multi-million-dollar contracts with Virgin Records. She would release albums such as Janet in 1993, Design of a Decade in 1995, and The Velvet Rope in 1997. The first album, Janet, Period, is meant to disassociate her public image from her family, dropping the surname. An R&B record, Janet incorporated a wide array of musical sounds. The theme of Janet is seen to be sexual intimacy, an abrupt departure of the image of her we see as conservative. The Velvet Rope was an album that came upon experiencing an emotional breakdown, whereby Jackson faced a long term of depression. Its lyrics focus on subject matters around self-worth, social networking, and domestic violence. It also explores themes of sexuality, including BDSM, sexual orientation, and same-sex relationships. Due to its sexually explicit content, the album reinforced Jackson's public image as a sex symbol, one of the most erotic performers of the 90s.
And yet again, her and Jam and Lewis wanted to move things on. So they had done the self-empowerment of Control, they had done the social injustices of Rhythm Nation, and now they were doing something which really focused on Janet as a sexual young woman. That's what the focus of Janet was really about. It was about her sexual awakening as a young woman. And so songs like If and That's the Way Love Goes really sort of embody that, I think. Particularly If. There's a whole erotic dance sequence and there's a simulation of oral sex at one point. That was really jaw-dropping at the time. People didn't expect Janet to go there, but she did. I think by the time of The Velvet Rope, she was really, she was a superstar, but there's a lot of baggage that she had had from the past that she hadn't really ever addressed, starting from a very young age. Even back when she was doing the TV shows like Good Times, she was told by the producers that she was too fat, she had to lose weight. She had to bind her chest because she was, for the TV show. And there was all kinds of pressure she was under. And I think that also her father being the way he was and her not really having a normal childhood, all that stuff had, she'd been dealing with and pushing down and suppressing over the years. And when it came to the writing of The Velvet Rope, she finally had decided that she wanted to address it in her music. She'd come off the tour as well. The previous tour for Janet was a really grueling, long tour. And that was when she first started suffering depression during that, and there was a feeling the past was catching up with her. So the theme of the velvet rope really was about everyone needing to belong. So the idea of the velvet rope is that sort of rope that separates the celebrities from the general public. And her idea was, we're going to go behind the velvet rope. I'm going to take down that barrier and let you inside, because we're all the same. We all need to belong. We all have these feelings ourselves. So that was really what she was getting at with that. But the album explored a lot more than that. It also talked about homophobia. It talked about domestic abuse. It also progressed her sort of sexual stuff. There was like S&M type tracks on there, like Rope Burn. It was her most adult album, and probably her most groundbreaking in a way. Although it wasn't as big as the three before, it was still a huge album. In terms of the kinds of the musical range on it, it was ambitious, for sure. Well, Janet had already built up a big gay audience by the time that The Velvet Rope came out, but she'd never really addressed them overtly in her music. And on the album The Velvet Rope, there was like several tracks which were a clear sort of message to her gay audience. And amongst them, Together and Going, of course, which was a big hit, which she described as a post-AIDS pop song. Then there was Tonight's the Night, which was a cover of the old Rod Stewart song, ballad. But she sung and she didn't change the gender, so it was seen as like kind of a lesbian love song. And probably most overtly would have been the song Free Zone, addressing gay love and homophobia and her stance on it, which was very kind of open and, accepting, of course, because that's who Janet was. She was surrounded by, gay dancers and people growing up, and she wanted to talk about it.
In her personal life, from 1987, Janet dated and married Rene Elizondo Jr. They kept their marriage a secret until they announced the split in 1999. All For You, released in 2001, was another success for Janet and further solidified her status as a sex symbol. The album is known for its sometimes explicit tracks in a dance pop or R&B style. This album was themed in Jackson's separation from her husband as she attempted to move on. Contrary to The Velvet Rope, which saw Janet discussing darker themes such as domestic violence, All For You is a much slower burning album, combined with R&B, rock, and disco. Its lyrics focus on passion, romance, and intercourse, whilst going into the themes of betrayal and deceit. It generally received well and came to be considered one of the most sexiest albums she's ever recorded.
MTV was very white rock and roll only, but it took the Michael Jackson videos and then people like Prince and Donna Summer to start opening things up. But there hadn't really been a young black teen female star before Janet that ever got MTV Play. And because she was making these videos of such high quality and that was so well produced, with choreography and effects and this great sort of innovative new sound, it was irresistible for MTV playlists. You had to program Janet videos because each one was an event and each one got better than the next. And you can't talk about Janet Jackson's videos really without talking about Paula Abdul either, because Paula Abdul was the choreographer of the early videos, and she really helped Janet find her feet in terms of how to perform in front of the camera. And she really sort of taught Janet the kind of some fundamental moves, or mixing kind of street dance and hip hop to create sort of a new, exciting form of dance, really, which hadn't been seen before on MTV.
In 2004, she released her album, Demita Joe. The same year, she would be embroiled in a scandal which would have a disastrous effect on her career. During her performance with Justin Timberlake at the 2004 Super Bowl, Janet experienced a wardrobe malfunction. As the act came to its peak, Justin Timberlake approached Janet and proceeded to pull off part of her costume, which led to her right breast being briefly exposed to a television audience of more than 140 million viewers.
Well, in 2004, Janet was invited to appear at the Super Bowl, which was a huge deal because it has like a mega, 100 million plus audience in America. It's the biggest kind of TV event of the year, live TV event of the year. And so she was doing a medley of songs which ended with her old friend Justin Timberlake joining her on stage. Janet knew Justin from back in the day where NSYNC opened for one of her tours. So they were friends, and there's a song in the line in the song Rock Your Body, I'm going to have you naked at the end of this song. And at that point in the choreography, Justin reaches across Janet's chest, rips open her bustier, which was supposed to reveal apparently a bra or something, but it didn't. What happened instead was that the whole thing came off and her breast was exposed. Well, it wasn't really. She was wearing a kind of a nipple shield, like a jewellery thing on her nipple. And it was no big deal. It literally, you saw it for like a fraction of a second, but it became such a media sensation in America, and it was used as sort of political capital for a lot of people to kind of, the right wing, to bang on about how standards of decency were going down in the public and this was a terrible, awful thing. And Janet was this sort of evil influence on the children of the nation, you know. Especially as being a black woman, I think that made her, she was painted as this kind of Jezebel, and she was really ridiculed and all eyes were on Janet, and she was to blame for this outrageous spectacle that had occurred that absolutely no one was really affected by, but everyone was bleating on about how it was so awful. Janet was urged to apologise. I think the mistake Janet made was that she didn't apologise maybe straight away. She sort of sat on it for a while and waited. Justin eventually gave an apology, and her career suffered, you know. Effectively, her records were blacklisted. She wasn't played on the radio. She never really had another major hit of the same size, really, as she'd had before. And her album at the time, Demeter Joe, which is a very good record, it kind of bombed because she wasn't getting the airplay support that she would normally get. So it was hugely damaging for her.
The event caused a media sensation. The general public was shocked, and many theorized the moment was planned rather than an innocent accident. However, neither party has confirmed this rumor. While Justin got off relatively scot-free for the incident, Janet faced huge backlash and experienced reduced airplay, televised promotion, and sales figures from that point forward. But this would only be one of many hardships Janet would come to face. Throughout her life, she has always been compared to her brother Michael, the king of pop. These comparisons often resulted on the relationship slightly being clouded. Sibling rivalry is common, but it's especially intense when both siblings are top music stars. While some reports emphasize their close bond, others hinted tensions.
One of the reasons why her music was overshadowed, actually, I think at the beginning particularly, was because her first album came out literally within a month or two of Thriller. So, you know, Michael was such a big star in the early 80s. Janet existed in his shadow. By the time Control had come out, you really weren't expecting that much of Janet, and she was very much referred to as Michael's little sister. But by the time that the Control cycle finished, she was very much a star in her own right. She was no longer his little sister. She was like a superstar in her own right, really. Janet and Michael were very close when they were kids. And so, of course, Michael wanted to help her as much as he could. So on the very early records, before Control, Michael kind of appeared on the backing vocals on one track, and the other brothers did as well. And they were very supportive. And he was still supportive and thrilled, I think, when Control became a big hit. But as Janet's star got bigger and bigger, I think Michael's relationship with that sort of shifted slightly. You know, first it was like, great, my little sister's done really well, Control's a hit. Then it was like, okay, Rhythm Nation's done incredibly well, and it's had more hit singles than I had on my last album. Okay, this is good. And then it was like she was more of a rival, if anything. And there was a sense, if you listen to Michael's music, that he was actually trying to maybe play catch up a bit with Janet. He approached Jam and Lewis to produce him, which they initially turned him down, because her sound became more cutting edge, really. By the end of the decade, Janet Jackson's music was more in fashion than Michael's, really. What Janet had that Michael never had was that she was really street, I think, and relatable. Michael was incredible, of course. He was like a alien superstar, force of nature, pop genius. But Janet had a relatability alongside her sort of superstar power. And she was still street somehow, in a way that Michael was never really, wasn't street by that point.
Despite any rivalry, they worked together on the song Scream. Scream reflected the stress both were under. Michael was dealing with legal issues and his marriage to Lisa Marie Presley, while Janet faced significant personal challenges.
By the mid-90s, Michael's career was not what it had been. There had been the first series of allegations which had been dealt with, and he had kind of come to an agreement that had moved on, and he'd had his short marriage to Lisa Marie Presley, and he needed a hit. The idea came to do a duet together. And it was odd, really, because at that point, Janet was arguably a bigger star than Michael. Certainly she had a lot more cachet and a lot more street cred than he did. So in a way, she was almost doing him a favour to do a duet with him. And so they did the duet Scream together, which became a massive hit. Michael was very competitive with Janet. They did their vocals together, and afterwards Michael insisted that he go back into the studio and re-record his vocals. He had that sort of competitive thing in him that he had to be the best. In the end, it worked really well together, actually. Their two voices combined, and their dancing together is spectacular to see. When you see them dancing in, the Scream video, which at the time I think was the most expensive video made, they're in a spaceship and they're doing this kind of amazing synchronized choreography together and dropping down their knees and jumping up and spinning around. It's amazing. When Michael died, I think Janet was, because she was the biggest star in the family now, remaining star, she was kind of pushed forward, I think, a lot to take on the mantle of being spokesperson for the family. And at the BET Awards, a few months after he died, she said something to the effect of, "To you, Michael Jackson's an icon, to us, Michael's family." And I think that kind of summed it up, really. She was having to deal with her own personal grief while being in the glare of the international media to expect to come up with something and talk about Michael. She was obviously personally devastated.
She also struggled when it came to being compared to other notable stars.
Janet's success with that kind of particular brand of dance pop with very heavily choreographed videos became a huge influence for a whole slew of artists that followed her afterwards, like Karen White, Paula Abdul, Ernest Vester Williams records even. It was hugely influential. Janet's own influences were, she had been a big fan of Lena Horne, and at one point she was going to play Lena Horne in biopic. And her brothers, of course. I mean, she was like a baby watching, particularly Michael and Jermaine being the main vocalists in the Jackson 5. She would watch her brothers and see what they could do. And so she was absorbing all that stuff from a young age, and all that fed into how she presented herself. I mean, there's a certain Jackson style that she just innately had. that you would see in the videos, a certain way of commanding the camera, of moving, the kind of sort of lock and pop dancing. All the choreography belonged to that sort of school of the Jacksons and had a sort of its own sort of unique brand.
In 2010, Janet met Qatari businessman Wissam Almana and began dating him just shortly afterwards. The couple became engaged and married privately in 2012. They introduced a son together, Issa Almana, when Jackson was at the age of 50. However, in 2017, it was announced that they had separated and were also looking to divorce. Her last album with Virgin Records would come to be 20YO, that was released in Japan in September 2006 and is a commemoration to the album Control on its 12th anniversary. 20YO represents the joyful and exotic history-making musical style of Control. An R&B and dance album, Jackson collaborated with many producers, earning at some point mixed reviews from critics, with some of them questioning the involvement of a few producers.
I think Janet Jackson was a million-selling megastar before she even did her first show. So her first big shows came on around the Rhythm Nation tour. And there was a huge expectation on her because, people had seen the videos and were expecting that level of choreography and drama and effects and production. And she didn't let them down. The shows she had like loads of dancers, she had like pyrotechnics and great staging. So from the get-go, she was really firing on all cylinders, I think, on the live front. When she became more of a sort of sex Janet, started appearing, she would invite men on stage and she would sort of do a sexy lap dance during the song Rope Burn. And she would also do a very Jackson type of thing to do as well, was that when she would sing a ballad, like Again, she would like break down and cry, which is like a very Michael thing to do. And I think that, people wanted that from Janet. There's that sort of Jackson star power that she had. And so that in itself was amazing to see on stage. But combined with all the kind of production and the dancers and the effects, it made it kind of like a must-see show. So for, decades she was playing sold-out arenas all around the world.
In the years following 20YO, Janet released the 2008 album Discipline, which experimented with electro-pop sound. It debuted at #1 on the US Billboard 200, her first #1 album since 2001's All For You. In 2015, she returned with Unbreakable, collaborating with her longtime producers Jam and Lewis. The album is split into 2 parts, one mostly composed by dance, and the second is more experimental. The title track, Unbreakable, was made to harness Jackson's unyielding devotion to her fans. Although fraught, Janet continued loving her dad until his death in 2018. He had died of pancreatic cancer. I think my father means well and wants nothing but the best for his kids. I just think the way he went about certain things wasn't the best way, but it got the job done. Without his drive, his strength, we wouldn't have had the success. We're a Black family that came from Gary, Indiana, and we broke all kinds of records around the globe. That's truth.
Well, I think it really was the music for Control that gave that statement for her. I mean, the song, the title track, Control itself, which was another big hit from the record, was like, it's autobiographical, totally autobiographical. So there's the lyrics in it, when I was 17, I did what my father told me. It was playing upon the history that she had herself and putting it in front of people and helping people relate to her, I suppose. Young black teenage girls didn't really have anyone at that time to like really relate to, and Janet had that history from the sitcoms, I think, and for the TV shows she'd done, of being sort of partly the girl next door, but partly a superstar Jackson. So it was this weird mix of relatability and superstar megawatt power that she had.
Janet Jackson's journey in the public eye has been both rocky and triumphant. She has consistently pushed boundaries and created a wholly unique musical career. She is the blueprint for pop music today. Her legacy is one of resilience, strength, and independence.
I think Janet would be seen as an innovator in black pop music, a groundbreaking star. Especially the 80s and the 90s, those records really redefined the parameters of what black pop music could be. The fact that she was using pop music, which could be seen as like quite a frivolous, art form, to talk about real issues, especially with Rhythm Nation, with talking about sort of social injustice and poverty, and she's at the sort of vanguard of black contemporary pop music for sure, and an icon for black women, for championing gay rights, just a superstar really, a pop music superstar.